Have you ever felt someone watching you, even when you're home alone? Or heard footsteps, when you were the only one inside? Tonight, you'll hear 3 true stories from people in Vietnam. Stories that will make you question what's real and what's not. Real fear, real events, and the question is, could it happen to you? Our first story takes us to the bustling capital, Hanoi, where a young woman named Lynn learned that some doors are better left unanswered. It was a rainy night in Hanoi, the kind of downpour that washes the streets clean but makes the shadows inside feel deeper and darker. Lynn was curled up on her sofa, the glow of the television her only company, when she heard a faint knock at her door. At first, she dismissed it as the wind or a branch tapping against the building. But then it came again, soft but deliberate. She thought it might be her neighbor, but a quick glance at the clock told her it was 1 a.m. Who would be visiting at this hour? A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She muted the TV, listening intently. Silence. Maybe she had imagined it. Cautiously, Lynn tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, bathed in the dim, flickering light of the building's old fluorescent bulbs. She saw nothing but the closed door of the apartment across the hall. Shaking her head, she told herself it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But, as she turned away, she heard it again, not a knock this time, but the sound of soft footsteps shuffling just outside her door. They paced back and forth, a slow, dragging sound that made the hairs on her arms stand up. Her heart began to pound against her ribs. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she tried to call her boyfriend, desperate to hear a familiar voice. The call went straight to voicemail. He wasn't answering. A wave of panic washed over her. She was completely alone. The knocking started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, almost like a code. Tap, tap, tap. It followed her as she moved. When she walked towards the kitchen, the knocking shifted to the part of the door closest to her. When she backed away towards her bedroom, the sound followed, always seeming to know exactly where she was. It was as if the person on the other side could see her through the solid wood. Trembling, Lynn switched her phone to the camera, her thumb hovering over the record button. She held it up to the peephole, her breath held tight in her chest. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a shadowy figure glided past the lens, a fleeting, dark shape that was there and then gone. It was too fast to make out any details, but she knew what she saw. Pure terror seized her. She scrambled away from the door, her mind screaming for a place to hide. She ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind her and pressing her back against it, her body shaking uncontrollably. She stared at her own terrified reflection in the mirror, her eyes wide with fear. And then, in the reflection, she saw it. Standing directly behind her, just over her shoulder, was the dark figure from the hallway. It was a tall, slender silhouette with no discernible features. Her blood ran cold. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she dared to open them and spin around, the bathroom was empty. She was alone again. She didn't sleep or wink that night, huddled in the bathroom until the first light of dawn broke through the window. The next morning, after the sun had chased away the oppressive darkness, Lynn finally worked up the courage to leave the bathroom. The apartment was quiet, just as she had left it. As she approached the front door, her eyes fell on a small, yellow sticky note stuck to the outside. Her hands shook as she unpeeled it, for simple words were written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "I know you were awake." The police were called, but they found no signs of a break-in, no fingerprints, no evidence of anyone being there at all. Lynn moved out a week later, but the memory of that night never left her. She never saw the figure again, but she often wonders who was knocking, and how they knew her every move. Our second story takes us to the cool, misty highlands of Dalot, where a family's dream home turned into a source of unending dread. Nam and his family thought moving to a quiet house on the outskirts of Dalot would be a peaceful escape from the city. The fresh mountain air, the spacious backyard for the kids to play in it, was supposed to be perfect. But their idyllic new life began to unravel when his children started noticing things. Shadows in the backyard that didn't belong. It began innocently enough. His 7-year-old son, Bao, would stop playing and stare intently at the far end of the yard. One evening, as Nam was reading him a bedtime story, Bao looked up at him with wide, serious eyes and said, "Daddy, someone is outside watching us." Nam tried to reassure him, telling him it was just the trees making funny shapes in the dark. To put his own mind at ease, he installed a security camera overlooking the yard. For the first few nights, the camera feed showed nothing but the gentle sway of branches in the wind. Yet the strange occurrences continued. Objects in the yard would be moved overnight. A garden gnome placed on the opposite side of the lawn. A child's toy car found perched on top of the fence. The camera footage never captured anyone or anything moving them. It was as if they teleported from one spot to another between frames. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, a constant, prickling sensation on the back of his neck whenever he was near a window. The climax came one moonless night. The entire family was asleep when Nam was jolted awake by a sound that sent a shiver down his spine. The slow, deliberate creak of the back door. He froze, listening. Had he forgotten to lock it? He grabbed the heaviest thing he could find, a metal flashlight, and crept out of the living room. The back door was slightly ajar, letting in a draft of cold night air. His heart hammering in his chest, he stepped outside into the darkness. His eyes scanned the yard, and that's when he saw it. A tall, shadowy figure stood motionless behind the back fence, its form obscured by the gloom, its face a complete blur. Nam shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and anger. "Who's there? What do you want?" As soon as the words left his mouth, the figure simply vanished. It didn't run. It was just gone. Shaken, Nam secured the house and spent the rest of the night wide awake. The next morning, he immediately went to check the security camera footage, desperate for proof of what he'd seen. He rewound the tape to the time he went outside. He watched the footage of the back door creaking open. He saw a figure step out into the yard. But it wasn't a stranger. The camera had captured him. Nam, standing in the middle of the yard, staring at the fence for nearly 10 minutes. The problem was, at that exact time, he had been fast asleep on the living room sofa. He had the time stamp from a text message he'd sent just before dozing off. It was impossible. He hadn't been outside. Weeks went by, and the feeling of unease never left. One morning, after a heavy rain, they discovered a set of fresh footprints in the soft mud of the backyard. They were large, barefoot prints, but they matched no one in the family, and when Nam checked with the neighbors, they didn't match them either. The family lives in constant fear, never feeling truly alone in their own home. And every night, when they check the security feed, the shadowy figure returns, a silent sentinel watching from the edge of their property. Our final story brings us to the vibrant, crowded streets of Ho Chi Minh City, where a young expat named Alex learned that your own reflection isn't always your own. Alex had always thought mirrors were harmless, just pieces of glass that showed you what was already there. He was renting a small, affordable room in a shared house in District 3, and he didn't pay much mind to the large, old-fashioned mirror that came with the bathroom. That is, until he saw the stranger staring back at him. It happened late one night. He stumbled into the bathroom, bleary-eyed, and splashed some cold water on his face. As he looked up, his gaze met his own reflection in the mirror. He blinked, but in the mirror, his reflection blinked a fraction of a second before he did. He froze, staring, his mind struggling to process what he'd just seen. It had to be a trick of the light, a result of his exhaustion. He tried to convince himself of that, but a seed of doubt had been planted. A few nights later, he was taking a photo in his room when he reviewed the picture and his blood ran cold. In the background, behind his own smiling face, a dark, indistinct shadow loomed near the bathroom doorway. He spun around, his heart pounding. There was no one there. The room was empty. The strange events escalated. One evening, he heard a sharp cracking sound from the bathroom. He rushed in to find a thin, hairline crack running across the surface of the mirror. It hadn't been there before. Over the next few days, more cracks appeared, branching off from the first one, seemingly on their own. They didn't look random. As he stared at the fractured glass, he realized with dawning horror that the lines were forming a shape. The shape of a strange, distorted face. As he leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass, a soft whisper seemed to slither out from the mirror itself, a voice that was barely audible but chillingly clear. "I see you." In a panic, Alex decided he had to get the mirror out of his house. He grabbed a screwdriver and began to remove it from the wall. As he loosened the final screw, he glanced at the reflection one last time. The face in the cracks seemed to twist into a grotesque smile. At that exact moment, the shadow he'd seen in his photo, which had been subtly lurking in his peripheral vision, vanished completely. Alex didn't wait. He packed a bag and moved out the very next day, leaving the mirror behind for the landlord to deal with. He found a new apartment and tried to put the terrifying experience behind him. For months, things were normal. He started to believe it was all a bad dream. Then, one afternoon, a small package arrived in the mail. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, was a small, handheld mirror. Tucked alongside it was a note, written in the same handwriting he'd seen on the original lease for his old room. It said, "I'm still here." Those were 3 true horror stories from Vietnam. Have you ever felt someone outside, or seen something you shouldn't? Comment below if you've had a scary encounter, and don't forget to subscribe for more real horror stories every week.